Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 988B, and today's date is June 3rd, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. has a secret plan in the Middle East. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, the situation out in France, it is getting worse and worse day by day. And we know that France, they're going to be hosting millions of visitors at the Euro 2016 Football Championships. And right now, they're in a state of emergency. We know we have the travel advisory all throughout Europe. And what we are seeing right now is the people are very upset with their government. And hundreds of thousands of citizens, they've taken to the streets of France. And, of course, they're out there complaining about the new labor laws. We see on March 31st, about 400,000 people took to the streets. Now, of course, the organizers there thought it was around 1.2 million, but it was a lot of people. April 9th, about 120,000 marched in Paris across France for the sixth time, protesting against the labor reform laws that they created. On May 26th, more than 150,000 marched against the government's plans to make it easier for firms to hire and fire. And we're seeing more and more of these protests. We're seeing more and more of these people get upset. And we could be witnessing right now a revolution in France, because what is happening here is the people are becoming more and more upset with their government. And I've said this in the past, when you push people to the breaking point, you need to be very, very careful, because when they all join hands and they're all together, it is a power, and the government, most likely at this point, is getting nervous. And when we see more and more of these protests occur, a couple weeks between each one of them, and more people join them, we start to realize, well, something is about to happen, and we're going to need to watch this situation very, very carefully. Now, out in North Korea, we know the U.S. is putting a lot of pressure on North Korea. U.S. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew said on Friday that global action is essential to increasing pressure on North Korea to drop its pursuit of nuclear weapons. And what they're going to do is they're going to keep turning the screws until North Korea does something. Basically, what he's saying is, let's continually put pressure on North Korea, and we would like to have a regime change there. We would like to provoke them, maybe start war. Whatever we possibly can do, this is what we want to do, because the whole goal of the U.S. government central bankers is to go into each and every one of these countries and overthrow the governments and put in a puppet government. If they can do this in Russia, in China, in North Korea, Iran, Syria, and all the rest of the countries, Brazil, Venezuela, there would be no need for war, because they would be creating a one-world government, and then they can do whatever they want. But what we're seeing right now is that other countries are saying, we don't want to join. Is that the central banking system here in the United States that is controlling the dollar, they want to keep what they have. And to make this transition, they know they're not going to be able to have regime change in every single one of these countries. To make it look like they're starting fresh and new, they're going to create war. Because after the war, they say, oh, look, everything is damaged, infrastructure is destroyed, we need to rebuild, we need a new monetary system. And this is what they're pushing for right now. And we can see in the Middle East, we can see in Eastern Europe, in the Pacific, they are continually provoking these areas to get this war started. Now, out in Ukraine, we see the United States and Ukraine, they've signed an agreement granting Kiev a third tranche of a guaranteed loan of $1 billion. That just put them further and further into debt. We see Ukraine and NATO. They have confirmed a roadmap of NATO-Ukraine defense technical cooperation, and was approved during the meeting of NATO and Ukraine Joint Working Group on Defense and Technical Cooperation. The sides discussed the provisions of the State Target Defense Program on weapons and military equipment development for the period until 2020. So we can see already NATO is moving into the Ukraine space. We see that they want the entire country. They want the port. And this is why we see a buildup for this major offensive to the southeastern people. We see the UN is out there, and they're saying that Ukraine's spy agency, the SBU, is rounding up and torturing suspected rebel sympathizers. And the UN Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights said that in some areas, Kiev's disregard for human rights had become entrenched and systemic and needed to be urgently addressed. Now, they have hundreds of cases of illegal detentions, torture, and ill treatment of these detainees. Now, think about this for a second. The US, UK, and other countries are in Ukraine helping them with their police force, with their armed forces, and the US has no problem with this. The UK has no problem with this. They know what's going on inside of Ukraine. And if you take a look at the other countries, they have no problem with torture or ill-treating the people of the countries. I mean, the US has secret prisons or prisons outside of the US where they keep people there. They don't have any due process. They're tortured. So we can see this is what the US does. Now, Poland, they are planning a 35,000 strong paramilitary force to deter the Russian threat. Now, it's going to be formed in Poland to enhance their military capabilities as part of the preparations for a possible hybrid war with Russia. The new force is going to be comprised of about 35,000 civilian volunteers and will undergo military training. And then each Polish province, they're going to receive about one brigade of the Territorial Defense Force consisting of these volunteers. And we can see all the countries around this area. Guess what they're getting prepared for? They're getting prepared for war. And war is coming. The U.S. government, the central bankers, have been preparing for this for quite a while. Slowly but surely, they've been moving military assets in the Pacific, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, setting up the bases, bringing in the troops, using whatever excuse they have to use to continually bring in this equipment and troops. And they've done this over time, slowly but surely. Because they're getting ready, they're getting prepared for war. And we're at that point where everything is in place. We're at that point where they're provoking. And if you notice, they're provoking more often now. If you notice, they're trying to accelerate the process because the economy is failing. They know it's going to be collapsing. And they need war to be pushed forward any way they possibly can. And this will accelerate as we go towards the end of this year. As the economy continually collapses, it's going to build up, and we're going to see more of this. Now, out in Yemen, we see that Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the Blackwater Mercenaries, which is Academy, they're having a very tough time with the Houthis. And the Houthis right now, they have retaken central Yemen. And they've overrun the pro-Saudi forces. And at this point, the whole entire mission to get the people to pay for kicking out the puppet government, it is not working. That's why the U.S. is in Yemen with special forces with the cover story that they're going after Al-Qaeda. And remember, when we look at these countries and the U.S. wants to have the government overthrown, they use Al-Qaeda, they use al-Nusra, they use the Islamic State as their proxy forces to say, okay, we're going to overthrow this government. Once the government is overthrown, they use the legislation that was passed in 2001. Anyone that opposes the puppet government is then called Al-Qaeda, which is a terrorist. And they can use drone strikes on those individuals. And we realize that the U.S., they support all of these terrorist groups, and they use them any way they want to use them. Now, out in Syria, we realize that the U.S. is using the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and al-Nusra, which we know it is not. And we can see that the U.S. and the coalition forces are out there blaming Assad that they can't deliver humanitarian aid in certain areas. UK Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond, well, he was out there saying that, listen, we would like to deliver the aid, but we just can't get to certain areas. The Assad government is not permitting us, because what is happening is in these certain areas, it is the terrorist groups. And the coalition forces want to drop military assets to these terrorist groups, not humanitarian aid. This is the cover story. This is what they use. They have been parachuting in a lot of ammunition to the moderate rebels, but it's funny how Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, al-Nusra all pick it up. And we see at this point that a spokesperson for Assad's government is saying, no, this is not true. These areas are overrun by terrorists. These areas are not safe. Humanitarian aid cannot be delivered to this area, and the Syrian government and the Russian government have been delivering humanitarian aid to all the different areas. We care very deeply about the people, and we want to aid the people. Remember, the people in Syria, they are rooting for Assad. He is stuck with them. He has invited Russia in, and with the help of Russia, they are removing the terrorist groups, which is the United States government central bankers, which is in this country, a sovereign country, without the permission of the government. They have boots on the ground. We have invaded a country. That is what has happened here. So we can see that Russia, they've delivered humanitarian aid. They had airdrops, convoys, and they've delivered about 16 tons of food to many different areas. And the Syrian government and the Russian government are saying, listen, you're not going to be delivering these military assets in areas where there are terrorists, because it makes no sense. Because the people are not going to get this supplies. And they also realize that it's not going to be the supplies everyone thinks it's going to be. It's going to be military weaponry. Now, Russia, with their Su-34 bombers, they flew into the border of Syria and Turkey, and they destroyed the Islamic State oil refinery plants in that area. Now, they're hitting the oil reserves located near the border, trying to cut off the funding of the terrorists, because as we know, Turkey is supplying military equipment, they're buying the oil, and Russia has been doing everything they possibly can to reduce the flow of money into the Islamic State. And what's very interesting about all of this, and I've mentioned this before, is that the U.S. Treasury, they can keep exact figures on how much the Islamic State is making from the sale of oil. But they can't find, the $6 trillion in the Pentagon. They don't know where this money went in Afghanistan, but they know exactly what their proxy army is doing. It's completely amazing. Now, Russia is discussing sending special forces into Syria. As we know, the United States government central bankers, they have special forces in there. And I think Russia, as they bring in their aircraft carrier to the Mediterranean, they realize that the U.S., they're planning something. Because we see right now that American warplanes, they have launched airstrikes against different targets inside Syria. We don't know exactly what they are. They're saying they're going after the Islamic State. We know that's not what they're doing. But this is the first time they've done this since 2003. And they're launching these jets off of the USS Harry S. Truman. And we can see right now we have that aircraft carrier in that area. Now there's another aircraft carrier coming to the Mediterranean. That's the USS Dwight Eisenhower. And it's going to be there for 7 months. It has around 7,000 service members on board. And it's going to support operations. Very interesting. And they're sailing there with their strike group. So we're going to have the 2 aircraft carriers in this area. You think something's being planned for this August because we're seeing a lot of military buildup. We're seeing all the military assets being brought into Jordan. They're having their drills in this area. We see another aircraft carrier now set sail for the Mediterranean. The USS Harry S. Truman came from the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean, and now we've launched jet fighters to go into Syria. Things are really starting to heat up here. Now, the U.S. came out once again, and they've said to Russia, listen, do not target Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria, the Nusra Front, because we're afraid you're going to hit the moderate opposition. And Lavrov was out there saying they're telling us not to hit Nusra because there is normal opposition next to it. But that opposition must leave terrorist positions because we long have agreed on that. And the U.S. is not doing it. Now it looks like, and this is coming out of Veterans Today, the U.S. has a secret plan in Syria. And it looks like there was a meeting between American, Turkish, Israeli, and SDF representatives, joined by military operation leaders of the Free Syrian Army, Islamic State al-Nusra, and they outlined a staged chain of events that's going to move the Islamic State out of a certain area, and they're going to be replaced by these other forces. So what we're looking at right now is that they're setting everything up for what is coming, because we realize that Russia is going after the Islamic State. The U.S. is now quickly trying to get the moderate rebels into position. Now, we have to realize that much of Syria's wealth is centered around Raqqa. It's not just oil fields out in Raqqa. This is an area where the largest hydroelectric facility powers a lot of Syria. This is the largest source of fresh water in the entire Middle East, which sustains the wheat and cotton production that drove the Syrian economy. Now, over the past 48 hours, tens of thousands of militants, trained militants in Jordan. Now, we saw this back in 2013. We saw this back in 2014, where they train all these different militants, these terrorist groups. They come from Jordan. They enter Syria. And they're preparing for what is coming in August. Now, we saw this and we reported on this all the way up to when the Islamic State broke out in Syria and Iraq. We knew they were training tens of thousands of individuals in Jordan. The same thing is happening once again. And when we start to put all these pieces together, when we put the piece where the USS Harry Truman is in the Mediterranean, the USS Eisenhower is on its way, there's a travel advisory throughout Europe. It looks like we're going to have some type of an event from the sleeper cells with the Islamic State in Europe or wherever they're going to do it. We know that they've been beefing up the border between Syria and Turkey. The U.S. has given them longer-ranged military assets, missile systems that can reach 90 kilometers. They've built 2 bases in the northern part of Syria. The U.S. is working with the Kurdish population. They have special forces already inside the U.S. The refugees were released into Europe to cause chaos, so the European countries would bring in military assets and troops, which they have done. They've been training individuals non-stop, and now they're releasing them into Syria. This is showing us that they are preparing for this major offensive in August. Now remember, the U.S. government central bankers, they're not perfect. Can something happen? Can Russia step in? Of course. But the indicators and everything that we've been seeing is pointing to something very big coming in August, which leads me to what Obama said when he was speaking on May disasters. Which includes an evacuation plan. And they should have a fully stocked disaster supply kit. And there's one more thing in his speech, which is very interesting, is that there is now a FEMA app that can direct you to the nearest FEMA shelter in the event of a major emergency. Now, is he talking about a hurricane? Is he talking about a major earthquake? Or is he talking about something completely different? And if we look at this, and we take this piece, and we put it with all the other pieces that we've been putting together, we see that all these indicators are now pointing to a major event, a major offensive in August, a collapse of the economy, and we all need to be ready and prepared. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.